Welcome to Wisdom Talk Radio, a collaborative community of explorers in conscious living. Hello and welcome to Wisdom Talk Radio. This is Laurie Seymour, host of Wisdom Talk Radio and founder of theBacaJourney.com. TheBacaJourney.com is the place where you can find resources for all things that will help illuminate your journey. I'm here today and I'm delighted to be welcoming Dr. Idara Bassey. She is a licensed attorney, corporate healer, and executive coach. And given that triumvirate, that's quite a mouthful, isn't it? We'll be looking forward to finding out more of how that all flows together. Since 2002, she has helped create holistic solutions to personal and corporate challenges by offering energy balancing services and intuitive development training, in addition to coaching services for intelligent, self-aware lawyers and other professionals who are committed to continued personal growth and living in alignment with their highest values. Idara's writings include the award-winning essay collection, Reflections of Mystical Sistah, on traveling down the road to self-definition, and the ebook, Supercharge Your Life, How to Use Woo-Woo to Become the Most Fabulous You. Don't you just want to read that right now? Well, welcome, Idara. I'm so pleased to have you here. And I know our listeners are in for a treat.
Thank you, Laurie. Just really honored to be here. Thank you.
So there's so many things I want to ask you. One thing that occurs to me is, I know, you were trained as an attorney and you're working with other attorneys.
Indeed.
And I'm curious how other lawyers relate to you when they see you're talking about things like, energy healing, intuitive development. That all sounds pretty woo-woo, I'm sure.
Sure.
But
Sure.
how do they relate to you? And I wonder if you have a story of somebody that started out relating to you at arm's length, like how do you think you can help me, and what is it you really do, to being your greatest supporter.
Sure. Absolutely. Well, I'll have to backtrack a little bit to give you some context about how these two worlds came together.
Please.
I was fortunate to grow up in a home where my late father was a spiritual seeker. And along the way, all sorts of beliefs and permutations of faith became present in the household. And so I was very used to seeing a lot of, hearing about a lot of mystical ideas about inner divinity. And we didn't necessarily go to church because my father felt that you can find God in a grove of trees just as easily as you could in a building on Sunday morning. So I was very fortunate to have that background, even though I grew up in the South, and when I would let people know that I didn't go to church, they would tell me that I was going to hell, but I heard other messages at home. So that really was a very strong influence in my spiritual path.
Yes.
And so I was nurturing these ideas along the way. I really think my journey officially started when I was about 17, when I started working with affirmations and whatnot. And as time went on and my interest grew, I have to say my father felt a little bit concerned because he thought that if I let people know too much about these beliefs that I was nurturing and cultivating on my own, that it might derail me professionally speaking. So under that concern, I kept these worlds very separate. I was going through school, getting awards and degrees and whatnot, and went through my legal training and took special pains to keep these worlds separate. And I worked for a little while. But
That inner call does come, doesn't it?
it does. It does. As they say, that I could not quit metaphysics per se,
Mm-hmm.
and
Or it wouldn't let you quit.
it wouldn't let me. That's probably a better word. And probably within 3 or 4 years ago, I had a local attorney here in the Atlanta area where I'm based who called me out of the blue because I had already developed my practice. I started that in 2002, but I didn't target my services to lawyers at that time.
Mm.
And this young woman had seen my website. To this day, I don't know how she found out about me, and was experiencing some cash flow problems in her practice. And she thought that she might want to get some energy healing work to remove these kind of blockages. And once I picked myself up off the floor, I was like, oh, I'd be happy to work
Mm-hmm.
with her in this regard, in this capacity. And she made it very clear that one of the reasons why she decided to call me is because she read about my background in the law. So she went out of her way to find me because she
Mm-hmm.
thought that I could relate to the trenches she was in, basically, as far as
Sure.
her professional experience. And
Mm-hmm.
I think to her that gave me a level of credibility that she may not have afforded somebody who had the um, healing training, but not the professional corporate experience to kind of to relate to her more easily.
Mm-hmm.
So that was a really game changer for me as far as my practice was concerned. And it was with that she had a good experience. We ended up working for quite some time, almost a year, if I recall.
Mm-hmm.
And she referred her partner to me. She referred several other of her colleagues in the profession. And that's when things started to snowball. And it occurred to me that, okay, well, maybe I should be targeting my efforts to assist these people who've been right in front of my face for
Yeah.
how many years.
Yeah.
But I had every intention of keeping these worlds fairly separate because I just thought, well, because I was still keeping a foot in the legal profession, a
Mm-hmm.
day job or a day commitment to keep the roof over the head until, things would, appropriately snowball. And, but by golly, and now the legal profession is in, for lack of a better word, in a fair amount of crisis.
Mm-hmm.
We have record levels of chemical dependency, depression,
Mm-hmm.
and all of a sudden we're hearing the words mindfulness.
Mm-hmm.
We're hearing work-life balance, all these type of ideas that probably would have gotten you laughed out of the room as recently as 10 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And literally 2 weeks ago, I gave a presentation. I may have told you about this at the state bar. We have continuing legal education courses
Mm-hmm.
that practitioners are required to take to keep up their licensing. And we had a whole day devoted towards uh, lawyer wellness. And I was featured as a speaker there, and I gave a session, a workshop actually, on intuitive lawyering. And
Ooh.
by golly, who would have thunk it that I would have a rapt attention from record audience enrollment about how to leverage your sixth sense in
Mm-hmm.
the conducting of your law practice. And and then you would have people kind of sneak up to me during the break or after the session was over, sharing their experiences of, I guess, intuitive impressions that they didn't necessarily term as such at the time, but upon retrospect, were able to say that, oh, well, maybe I should, formally afford more credence to
Mm-hmm.
this
Mm-hmm.
idea. And I was really still presenting these concepts very practically speaking. Um,
Well, they are practical, aren't they? I
yes,
mean, at
yes,
their base and at
indeed,
their best, they're
indeed,
practical. I mean, as people
indeed.
can learn how to connect with and trust, what
Yeah,
I call the compass within, and we're talking
yeah,
about is that sixth sense,
I love
then
that.
they have the ability to navigate everything.
Indeed.
Not just their relationships or their spiritual life, but their practical everyday lawyering life.
Sure, sure. And really what I was presenting it as as expanding your definition of just what you term to be information. You know, you can meet
Ooh.
somebody, so people can wrap their heads around that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
You can meet somebody for the first time and shake their hand, and if you feel a wave of nausea, um, well, it may not be a coincidence. That might be some information you need to take into account as far as determining how you deal with that person. If you want to hire that person, you might take some additional action steps that you would not have taken, but for the fact that you had that particular trigger or insight that came along with meeting this person.
So
So,
you're really teaching people that they're an energy system, they're a receiving system.
well, of course, that's in my mind.
I
I'm
mean, you
not
don't have to even
necessarily,
use those words,
yes,
but
I
that's what
don't
you're
have to use,
doing.
yeah, I don't have to use those words, but they can wrap their heads around the fact that um, this might be very helpful to look into this concept a little further because this can give me a strategic edge. This can help me problem solve more effectively.
Hmm.
And so I was focusing on both personal and professional benefits
Hmm.
from there. And really it went well. I was very, very pleased with the way people were responding. We had an experiential exercise as part of the workshop as well, where I had them, do some mock psychometry type of undertakings so they can kind of
Hmm.
see for themselves. This is not just about talking about the concept
Hmm.
or reading about it even, but actually experiencing it for yourself.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
so that's how things have unfolded. Of course, this is kind of the Reader's Digest version, many years of distillation here. But I really did see an uptake in general interest in the population after September 11th. I think
Yes.
that's where people were extremely, I mean, that just shocked a lot of people open into reevaluating everything.
Hmm.
And then perhaps they may have been lulled to sleep a couple of years later, but at least that was that big burst of energy that just said, okay, well, maybe the way I've always been doing things may not be the best way to continue.
Yeah. And maybe how I've seen the world is not really how
Absolutely.
the world is.
Absolutely. Indeed.
That clarion call
Sure.
that we have the choice to respond to or not.
Sure.
And are you finding that people are recognizing that inner call? That, when I think about the hero's journey, which is such a big metaphor that I use, are you finding that people are being willing to listen to that inner call more readily, more fully?
Let me put it this way. I've always thought that you have the option of either heeding the nudges of the universe or waiting for the
Hmm.
two by four.
Absolutely,
And
yes.
more people are on the receiving end of the two by four.
Hmm.
With marriages unraveling, chemical dependency, depression, and all these major type of life shifts, people are being forced to reevaluate just about everything. And then
Hmm.
you have this backdrop of what's going on in the world. People are looking for answers,
Hmm.
and they're looking in places that they didn't necessarily feel like they would necessarily be exploring.
Hmm.
So I can just tell in my own legal career. I mean, from when I was in law school to today, there was a very clear linear path once upon a time where you put on your ostensible blue suit and you march towards Atlanta and you just say, okay, I want this job at XYZ law firm, and I'm going to sit there till I become a partner, and I'm going to drive off into the sunset. Well,
we don't
that,
factor in wellness, happiness, a good
oh
life,
no,
or
what?
anything about living in alignment with your own values.
Oh no, not at all. I mean, that's extraneous. Extraneous. But now, as people are seeing that, okay, when I do become a partner, that doesn't mean all my problems have been solved. I'm on my second marriage and my kid is strung out on meth. Maybe I might need to think about approaching life a different way. And I know I'm being a little bit extreme, but not too
But
extreme.
not from according to my own practice either. I mean, I've had the
Yeah.
same kinds of experiences, so I don't think you're being too extreme.
Yeah, there's a little bit of facetiousness there, but there
I
is,
know.
I mean, this is what's happening.
Mm-hmm.
And from that vantage point, you're seeing a lot of people with the hyphenate, the ultimate hyphenate, former lawyer turned cake baker, former lawyer turned fisherman.
Mm-hmm.
They still want to keep that, and there's nothing wrong with that because there is a value to that training,
And a
and there's a
credibility that
gravitas
it gives
there
one.
and credibility that comes with
Mm-hmm.
that. But you are just choosing, and I'm telling people now, even young people that come to me with questions about going to law school, I never discourage anybody from attending, but I do encourage them to make sure that they don't leave their heart. They don't leave their heart. I mean, they don't leave their mind and their heart just completely discombobulated.
Yeah.
Think about
Well,
what your heart has to say,
mm-hmm.
in this equation.
Well, you talked about that sense and still perhaps even now that sense of keeping those worlds separate,
Yes.
which I think if we're really to live a full life, if we're really to live in a way where inside and outside are in harmony and feel aligned, that in some way those worlds have to come together, however that is.
Yes,
Does that make
absolutely. In
sense
fact,
to you?
that makes a lot of sense, and that is actually one thing that I stressed in my workshop, that we spend a lot of time, energy, and tuition dollars in leveraging what comes out of our intellect. And I would be the last person to tell somebody to put all that in a trash bag and toss it. All I'm
Mm-hmm.
telling you is to bring in conjunction with that an aspect of your being that is not linear, an
Mm-hmm.
aspect of your being that doesn't depend on your critical thinking, and bring it all together so you can respond to situations or respond to life from a more holistic and integrated standpoint.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you're going strictly through life through your intellect, um, well, that's one way to do it, but there's a depth and a richness of color and authenticity that is lacking when you don't consult, as you say, with your inner compass.
Mm-hmm.
So if you can bring those two together, and for example, there's one of my favorite quotes by Albert Einstein: the level of consciousness that created a situation is not the level of consciousness that will bring about a resolution.
Exactly.
We have some pretty complex challenges on our plate as individuals, as a society, and whatnot. So to think that the way that we've always thought is going to do the job is disingenuous.
Right, right.
We need some new thinking to come to bear
Mm-hmm.
and some new approaches because, I mean, the intractability of some of these issues, I'm just thinking about places like Syria, for example,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
that are continuing to unfold in horror around us, really require us to um, bring in, some backup, for lack of a better term.
Bring in that bigger picture that
Absolutely.
that may indeed have some of those answers that we
Sure.
don't know what they are because
Sure.
our I want to say, and I'm somebody that has always valued my head, my thinking abilities, my cognitive interaction with the world.
Sure.
But I also know how limited it is now. It's
Well, yeah,
limited when it's just in the service of when it's not in the service of that bigger picture.
sure. And for a very long time, I thought that's really all I had to offer the world.
Mm-hmm.
A strictly intellectual approach, and I've put in time and energy getting multiple degrees. Surely that's the end of the story. But at one point, I think it might have been 1996, I do remember being sitting in a church service and realizing like a ton of bricks that I knew a lot about God intellectually speaking, but
Mm-hmm.
not from a heart perspective.
Yeah.
And I was like, I was like, really? How is this possible? I mean, it's like
Yeah.
a whole aspect of my being that has not been developed, and I find that problematic.
Well,
That's
unless
just
we
me.
start having the experience. See, I came from the world of being a psychotherapist. And
Yes,
so I knew the world not only of the intellect, but then of the emotion.
sure,
And that emotional world becomes so captivating. And there's more than that.
sure,
And so, when I first started having experiences of other dimensions, of other realities, of this what I'm calling a bigger picture,
Mm-hmm.
And what came with that was my first experience, really, of feeling love.
Mm, gotcha.
So that experience is so needed, so that we have something more to rely on um, than, as you said, what has already created the problems that we're dealing with.
Yes, I agree. I definitely agree.
So your career path has certainly been non-traditional, shall we say?
Oh, you think? Well, just a couple of twists here and there. And it's so funny because people kind of gawk and whatever. I do remember when I had relocated to San Diego, and that's a story that I recount in my book. And I
Mhm.
do remember I was doing some channeling work from a client that was distraught and, finishing up with that. And then I was preparing for a lecture on contract law I was supposed to give later on in the day.
Oh,
And,
I
and
love
I'm
it.
like, well, this is a normal day for me. And it didn't really occur to me as being unusual until I would talk to other people about it. And it's like,
Mhm.
yeah, no.
But how wonderful that you have that range, that you didn't say, "Oh, I have to give up the intellect," because indeed you don't.
Well, I have to say, when I was in San Diego in the early 2000s, I probably was the only intuitive in town who drafted her own agreements. And I would present them to to the proprietor of the business that I would be working on behalf, and they would look at
Mhm.
me, and I just thought, well, I mean, we're going to have a business relationship, shouldn't we map
Mhm.
this out? But I've been doing it for so long. I've been living this way for so long that it doesn't occur to me to be unusual. But
Mm.
it's just how I operate.
Well, when you can ground and I'm just going to use woo woo because you use that in your
Oh,
book
sure,
title.
sure, yeah,
When you can ground the woo woo in
yeah.
and maintain that connection, you
Mm-hmm.
realize
Mm,
that um, we don't have to leave our feet,
sure,
connected to the earth. We can
sure,
have that connection as above, so below,
yeah.
and really honor the full picture there.
Well, I find it enormously helpful with problem solving. Believe it or not,
Hmm.
when I have something on my mind that I'm trying to work out, I look for guidance everywhere.
Hmm.
I mean, I'm talking about license plates. I'm talking about song lyrics. The three crows that are on the corner. It's like, why are they congregating in the corner?
Hmm.
And you take that in conjunction with your linear, rational problem solving skills, and you bring them together and see what comes out of considering them in conjunction with one another.
Yes. Yeah.
And by golly, you really come up with some interesting solutions. I think it covers all the bases more effectively
Hmm.
than just strictly going out of one lens or the other.
Hmm.
And I think individuals develop their own personal lexicon over time, which I just find fascinating.
Hmm.
And so I think, if you think that God as a concept of being everywhere present, well, that group of crows can offer just
Yeah.
as much information to you as a book in the library,
Yeah. It's
if
another
not
expression
more.
of God.
It's another expression. So if you are, everywhere present, everywhere um, cognizant, just everywhere. So I just love the idea that the universe supports you at every turn,
Hmm. Hmm.
um, through traditional, non-traditional means, or what have you. But it definitely makes life a lot more interesting.
So I'm thinking about leadership and leaders in general, and
Mhm.
uh, I know that that's one of the things that you work with is executive coaching, and in my mind, part of that is helping people claim their own inner voice
Sure,
and claim more of who they are, so that they can have the seat at the table in a way that serves a greater good.
indeed,
Can you speak to that a
indeed.
little bit about how you are seeing that?
Sure. I, again, would have to backtrack to the early 2000s when I was actually working on my doctoral thesis. I worked on incorporating these metaphysical principles in corporate environments. That was my substantive focus. And I ran
Hmm.
across a quote that just really just propelled me forward as far as my personal inquiry into this topic. And it was by Cheryl Richardson, by all people.
Hmm.
And it was the downfall of a corporation is a potent example of what happens when unhealed individuals hold leadership positions.
Hmm.
I said, wow. And this was shortly after the implosion of Enron. That is actually what kind of inspired me to start looking at this idea that, who's at the helm as from an energetic perspective has
Hmm.
got to infiltrate throughout the organization as a whole.
Hmm.
And
We
looking
we
at,
know that now, don't we?
yes,
What
we
we're seeing in
do.
the world.
Absolutely. Funny how that happened.
Mm.
So from an energetic perspective, looking at corporations or any kind of macro level organization as
Hmm.
an energetic entity, and just and these concepts about energy that we know about, how they also function the same way in this environment as they would in a person's arc field
Hmm.
or what have you. So that to me was just a really critical piece in determining how to heal larger, demonstrations of misalignment. I'll call it that.
Okay,
I
that's a
prefer to
lovely way
call
to
it
put
that
that.
instead of dysfunction or what have you.
Yeah, no, no.
And so I even do that when, with my work with lawyers now. The profession can be healed by individually targeting the members of that profession. So any macro level organization or entity can be looked at from its constituent parts,
Hmm.
and step by step, as you realign those individual component parts, the it only sets up a momentum where it's available for where large scale transformation
Hmm.
is possible.
Yeah, I have someone, a friend that I interviewed for Wisdom Talk Radio a long time ago who works in relationships,
Mm-hmm.
and she doesn't work with couples. She
Okay.
works with one person at a time on the relationship, one person, and speaks to the way in which that change will change the dynamics of the relationship completely.
Wonderful.
And
Wonderful.
that's really what you're talking about. Is it? We could say it's from bottom up, but it's deeper than that. I mean, it's more than that,
Sure.
because it's talking about uh, an energy system, and if you change any piece of that energy system, any dynamic in that energy system, you change the system.
Indeed, absolutely. I mean, I do remember in my thesis that I would even talk about if you have a level of discontented custodial staff,
Hmm.
guess what? They're going to be cleaning the office with the energy of their discontentment.
Hmm.
And each individual executive is going to interact with that discontentment when they throw something in the trash or when they pick something off a counter or what have you. I mean,
Hmm.
it just really gets that minute.
It does. When you walk into a room after that room has been cleaned and you go, ooh, I
Yes,
guess I'm coming down with something because you think it's
yes,
you,
yes,
rather than this energy that you've walked into that is not aligned with who you are.
sure, sure. And for people who find it difficult to move beyond their respective titles, I think this is a very challenging concept for them to wrap their heads around because, I mean, if you don't even see somebody as a person, or if you don't acknowledge their humanity,
Hmm.
um, by golly, you're going to have a hard time believing that they have an impact on the fortunes of this organization that you were heading at just as much as you do.
Hmm. Hmm.
And yeah, it's just it still blows my mind all these years later. And I really would love to do more work on that kind of scale, corporation, reading the energy of corporations.
Yeah, I would love for you to be doing that.
Yeah, well, I put it out there.
Yeah, yeah. Well, because, and I'm, thinking about our listeners right now, that when you have somebody like you come in to work with the energy of a corporation, that's where, this might sound woo-woo, but that is where the magic can really happen. I mean, you can do so much, so many attempts at changing a corporate culture,
Sure.
but until you come in and really work at that level of, that seems very basic, of honoring everybody in the organization, of, as you said, seeing the humanity of everybody in the organization, that everyone has a piece
Mm-hmm.
of an organization's success or downfall.
Oh, sure, sure. I do remember a book I'd run across when I was doing my research by Sarah Lawrence Lightfoot, and the book was simply entitled Respect.
Mm-hmm.
And she's a woman of color, and she's a professor, very esteemed and honored in her respective interests. But she remembers an interaction with a student that was less than respectful. And she was on a panel discussion, and she said in a very measured tone, the way you are speaking, you need to speak to me in such a way that I can even hear you. I
Mm-hmm.
cannot hear you with that energy that you are bringing to this space. And I just thought, whoo, okay.
She's
Yeah.
nailed it.
Yeah, I think she did. I think she did. You need to approach me. You don't have to like me, but you do have to respect me. And so if more organizations practice this type of radical respect, how would that change things on a macro level? I mean, that's it's just
Mm.
amazing to envision.
I love that radical respect.
Yeah, yeah, creating spaces where that is possible to flourish, to cultivate a depth and, and how people relate to one another.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So it definitely does challenge the current dynamic, to say the least. But we can still be hopeful.
Well, we have to be hopeful, because if we don't hold the space for something to change, we're
Yes, yes,
lost.
that is true. I definitely agree with that. Yes.
Yeah. And I know you're not just working with lawyers, are you? You're working with
No, no,
professionals
it's
of all stripes.
all walks of life. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
no doubt about that. I think a lot of people struggle with trying to integrate their values into their life expression on all in all fields, really.
Mm-hmm.
People have these points of ethical dilemmas. It's like, wait a minute, okay, I'm not liking what policies I'm seeing here, but then again, I have to pay the mortgage. And so it's an ongoing type of tweaking
Mm-hmm.
that needs
Mm-hmm.
to happen. And
How do you help people deal with something like that?
well, for first of all, you need to identify where you're coming from.
Mm-hmm.
What's your baseline of operation in the world? For example, I mean, when you get out of bed, you have a baseline of energetic either dissonance or wherever, however you are vibrating at that time. So if you're not aware of that, when somebody comes to you and you get all of a sudden you're worried about money, but you didn't have awareness of your baseline, you cannot assess the energetic impact that person has on you very accurately. So it starts with basic awareness, which,
Mm-hmm.
believe it or not, as simple as it sounds, is quite challenging for a lot of people to achieve
Mm-hmm.
in light of, okay, you get up, you look at your iPhone, you get up, you check your email. I mean, it's just like from the moment you open your eyes,
Yeah.
it's not
You're
even a moment.
focused on the outside world. You're focused on the
Absolutely,
exterior, and you have no connection
absolutely,
with who you are inside and how you're feeling and what you're aware of.
sure,
Mhm.
sure.
Yeah.
So identifying, becoming aware is the
Yes.
first step.
Hmm.
Once you get aware, then you could kind of flesh out the branches of the tree about what your values are, what makes you feel like you're being your best self, what makes you feel like you're not being your best self. Identify those things. And the triggers, the things that happen to you over the course of a day that either challenge or affirm one way or the other.
Mm-hmm.
So once we have identified, what's that ground zero, then we can kind of extrapolate from there about, okay, which things are negotiable, which things can be tweaked, which things do we have to learn how to accept. So it really starts again with the individual. A basic, and meditation, I think, is really one of the most incredible, effective ways to get to know what's in here.
Yeah.
I mean, people always ask me, well, how do I start this? How do I start channeling? How do I start swinging off the chandelier or whatever? You know, for me, it started with meditation.
Yeah.
It really did. I mean, I do remember feeling very clear that I needed to create a regular practice. It must have been 1996, actually. And then within a year, I was channeling my guides via
Mm-hmm.
automatic guiding. And
Mm-hmm.
then it kind of went from there.
Mm-hmm.
But actively cultivating the ability um, to tolerate and even flourish in silence, that's a big one for people, you
It's a
know?
very big one. As a meditation teacher, I certainly see that often. And because of the way I work with meditation and I work with energy during the time of meditation, I see that people are often more easily able to go into that space. And they're shocked, they're surprised, like, how could this happen? What does this mean? And then, well, they sometimes they want me to tell them about what they experienced. But what's so important is that they start to identify with their own experiences and start to
Absolutely.
find ways to decode what those experiences are and what they mean to them.
Sure, sure. I mean, what I mentioned earlier about developing your own personal lexicon,
Mm-hmm.
for example, I talked about the crows. I mean, if you look at all the books about omens and things, they would think that crows are just nasty old, harbingers of evil. But I've always found them to be very, very helpful and hopeful. They always seem to surface in hopeful situations. I think they're thoughtful animals. So that's how that concept resonates through me. And
Yeah,
everybody needs to kind of develop that code language for themselves.
exactly. And think about Game of Thrones. For any Game of Thrones fans out there, I'm one of them. There's a three-eyed raven that's a theme throughout the whole series
Mm.
that really connotes wisdom. So,
And you wouldn't know that unless you consciously decided to cultivate your own wisdom.
exactly. Yeah.
By golly, I mean, because CNN is not your truth. I mean, I know it's pervasive and 24/7, but it's not your truth.
Hmm.
And if that's the case, then you need to decide what is my truth.
Yeah. It's really not going to tell you about yourself.
No, no. And I know that's difficult. That's a difficult pill for people to swallow.
But when they do, when people, what I find is that when people start to appreciate, wow, there's this whole world inside here that is different, maybe in conjunction with, maybe just in addition to this
Yeah.
outer world that I'm so focused on, they become quite enchanted
Oh, I
and,
agree.
joyful with it.
I agree. I mean, there was a gentleman that approached me during a break during this session on intuitive lawyering that I recently facilitated. And he had just retired from law practice. He had practiced law for 38 years.
Mm.
And he sat there with this expression of amazement on his face. He's like, well, there were times when I was deciding cases that I may have consulted. But it's like, and this guy's 65 and he's sitting there. It's like he had to reevaluate his entire breadth of experience in light of this additional information that he's just getting at 65.
Wow.
And I just sat there. I was like, well, thank you for telling me this, but by golly, you have been given such a gift. He said, well, he was like saying, well, maybe it's too late for me to apply this further on professionally speaking, but personally speaking, I could certainly,
Right.
take that on because he, just decided to kind of take that as a challenge to see how to integrate these intangibles
How
in
wonderful.
I
Oh,
just
you're
got happy.
inspiring people right and left.
Oh, I was so touched, really. And yeah, so I that's one day in the life.
Wow. Any last wisdom points you'd like to provide for our listeners?
Oh my goodness, wisdom points. Let's see here. Well, I am a proponent, a strong proponent of listening to your heart and see where it will take you. I've when you are kind of deciding to perceive life or attack life in a different way that you have up until now, I think you should take small baby steps. And, again, the journey of 1,000 steps begins with the first one. If you get an intuitive flash about it might rain today and it's sunny as anything, but take your umbrella, humor the gods, and see where that takes you. And that could lead to to larger, more consequential decision-making points. But we've got a lot on our plate these days, and it would behoove you to leverage as many resources as possible.
Yeah.
So why not give yourself the chance and the option, the opportunity to cultivate those within yourself and see where it takes you.
Yeah. Thank you, Idara. That's beautifully said. Because those small steps are what lets our own inner wisdom know, hey, I'm willing to start paying attention. And then
Absolutely.
we are given more and more and more.
Got it. You got
Yeah.
it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Well, for those who want to find out more about your work and about content or reaching out to you, what's the best way to do that?
I invite everyone to stop by my website at www.onelightmessenger, that's ONE, light, LIGHT, messenger, all one word, .com. And you can find my blog there. You can find out a little bit more about my background and also indicates some of the services that I do offer. And look forward to connecting with y'all as many times as possible or feasible.
Wonderful. Oh, thank you again, Idara, for being here and being such a joy to speak with.
Thank you so much, Laurie. I really appreciate the invitation.
And thanks to our listeners for being with us today at Wisdom Talk Radio. If you're curious about meditation and connecting with your own inner wisdom, be sure to check out the Turea Meditation live sessions happening online twice each week. You can find out more over at www.thebacajourney.com, and that's the Baca, B-A-C-A, journey.com. Wishing you a journey full of discovery, illumination, and wisdom.
Thanks for joining us here at Wisdom Talk Radio. We wish you well in your conscious explorations. For more information and to join in the conversation, our website is wisdomtalkradio.com or at Wisdom Talk Radio on Facebook.